I'm KIRO 7 pinpoint meteorologist.
It is 43 degrees in downtown Seattle. I'm Ursula Royteen.
Subscribe to us on YouTube for our can't miss plays. KIRO Radio 97.3 FM. News and talk, powered by the Pacific Northwest.
The Big Lead is brought to you by 3010 Weight Loss for Life.
The Dori Monson Show on KIRO Radio. This is the Big...
Hey! Happy New Year! I've missed you. Gone for a couple of weeks, except for our Seahawks stuff. But we're back. We're ready for a new year.
Yes,
well
happy
fired up.
2020.
You know what? I'm looking forward to this year.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to washing out last year.
You know, I would say that is the majority of people that I've spoken with said 2019 is for the birds.
Yeah, well, a few nights ago, my wife and I went out to dinner with two other couples. And then we came home, and my wife went to bed, and it turns out the toilet got clogged.
No.
Yeah. So I wake up the next morning, and my wife goes, "Did you have to use the plunger?" I go, "How'd you know that?" And she goes, "Well, it's sitting out on the deck." And this is on New Year's Eve. And just she's saying, because, you don't want to put, it's been damp. You don't want to put it back where you keep it.
Yes.
You put it out on the deck until it dries off. And then midway through New Year's Eve day, the plunger, there was a little gust of wind and the plunger blew over. And I looked out and I said to my wife, right there, that sums up 2019 for me. Right there.
I'm not sure that everyone puts their plunger on the porch after they use it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But then, in case
That's
you...
a Dori Monson trick.
I think so.
Where do you put it?
Well, it dries where it is.
Yeah, but
You
it's...
turn on the fan, it dries.
No, but then you put it on the floor and the floor gets wet.
Well,
that's
no,
like
it's in a
underneath.
holder.
No, it's not in a holder. Plungers aren't in holders.
Yes, they are.
You're thinking of the scrub brush, Nicole.
No, that too.
Oh, for crying out loud. This year's even worse than last year so far.
No, it's not.
Okay, all right.
Got off to a good start.
Okay, all right. We are.
Plunger holder.
There were a couple of stories in your newscast. So the Attorney General is suing Johnson & Johnson. And I don't know much about this lawsuit. I don't know much about Johnson & Johnson, except over the years, I've always thought that Johnson was kind of trustworthy, but the other Johnson seemed like a weasel. So anyway, and then my question becomes, he's suing them because they've contributed to the opioid crisis here. Has he filed any lawsuits against the prosecutor who's legalized drugs, who's attracted a lot of heroin users from around the country? Has he filed a lawsuit against Seattle officials who are violating federal laws and still working to bring heroin death sites to Seattle and King County? Would he do anything against his own party? Of course not. Would he actually watchdog his own state? Of course not. Bob Ferguson wants to be governor someday, and he's going to need the help of all good Dems to get there. So he will never do or say anything, or certainly not act in a way that would jeopardize his rightful place in the governor's mansion someday. So he continues with these 50-some lawsuits against the Trump administration. He files this against Johnson & Johnson. But, Seattle wants to pass that income tax, which is clearly against the state constitution. He could save taxpayers millions of dollars if he wanted to just bypass or stop them from pursuing this and say, look, the state constitution is clear. You cannot do this. But he won't, because he'll lose the radicals. And remember, this is a guy who told us when he was running for AG 9 years ago, the greasiest, slipperiest weasel we've ever had in politics around here, Bob Ferguson. So again, I don't know if this Johnson & Johnson lawsuit has merit, but I know there are a lot of things he could watchdog. The feds have launched a criminal probe of Seattle transportation projects. That came down in the last week because of the streetcar ripping off tens of millions. You had a Seattle DOT director who ripped off millions from taxpayers and didn't get punished for it. He got like the tiniest of fines from an ethics commission. Sound Transit is tens of billions of dollars over budget. It is now, with the dawn of 2020, they are now 14 years behind schedule on their first phase. They are tens of millions of dollars over budget. And does Bob Ferguson do anything? No, go after Johnson & Johnson. That's what he's going to do. I haven't even started the show yet. That was just a reaction to your newscast. I get so much pent-up stuff
I know.
during my 2 weeks off.
I know.
I can't talk like this at home. Cry it out loud.
Thank goodness.
No. Nobody would want to hang out with me if I did that. All right, with that as mere prelude, let's get to the big lead. So a bunch of new laws went into place here in 2020. And it's interesting because once again, Seattle is just the absolute laughingstock of the country. Because or Washington State is, I should say, because these are state laws. But the one that, this is the one that I take real personally. You've heard about this stupid new booster seat law?
Yes.
Okay, so now children up to the age of 13, if they're 4'9" or shorter, they got to ride in a booster seat.
That's right.
Okay,
I think there are going to be a lot of kids breaking the law on that one.
I don't know how tall I was when I was 13. I might have been a little taller than 4'9", but I wasn't a lot
Much,
taller.
Yeah.
But I also know that I was a junior in high school when I was 13.
Okay, that part was unusual.
So, which is bad enough. I mean, that's tough enough as it is. Can you imagine my mom driving up to Ballard High School and me sitting in a booster seat to go to my junior year classes? Can you imagine how I would have been savaged by the kids?
But even a kid in middle school, I mean, like you get dropped off at the middle school dance and you get unstrapped from your booster seat?
Yes! It's insanity. When I was, what was I, 5 years old, my mom and my brother and I, we drove to North Dakota. And my mom had this big, ridiculous Olds 98. And we packed the back seat floor with pillows and sleeping bags. And so it would be a double wide for me. And then I just had all my comic books back there. And I would run around the back seat while going 120 miles an hour across Montana. Because my brother didn't believe the Olds 98 could do 120 like the speedometer says. And Mom says, oh yeah, I'll show you. And I remember my brother's...
Just because you survived that doesn't mean that was right.
But it doesn't mean that what we're doing today is better. My brother had his head out the window at 120 because he wanted to see what that felt like. I'm running around trying to reach for the remote because it was one of the first cars with remote windows. And I wanted to push the window up around his neck so he'd be stuck outside the car at 120 miles an hour.
I know, I fell out of a car because I wasn't in a booster seat.
Jeez. And so this is, the state is saying to 13-year-olds, I mean, you go to a middle school, there are a lot of kids who are, haven't hit a growth spurt yet. And they're going to have to sit in a booster seat here in Washington. I mean, it's just pure insanity.
Well, what about you can't ride shotgun either until you're a certain age. Like,
Oh, yeah, you can't ride in the front
until
seat
yeah, right.
until you're what age?
I think it's 12, isn't it?
So you have to be sitting in the back seat. I can't tell you how many lovely conversations I had with my daughters as I was driving them around, and they're sitting in the seat next to me.
Let me verify that age. I
I
know it's close to being a teen.
I think it's the same. Yeah, it's the same.
It
age.
already
height
exists
thing.
right now. Yeah.
that one still that
Yeah,
exists.
let's just look at it right now.
You can't have 12-year-olds.
A state patrol trooper is gonna text you and clarify. But in any case, I know that I overheard over a break that even sitting in the front seat.
Yeah, well, I knew that's part of the new law. I heard about
Yes.
that. So anyway, that's one of the new laws. So if you are, and by the way, in a state that talks all the time about not discriminating and being inclusive, what about the short kids? Who's protecting the short kids? And if they're listening right now, because school doesn't start until Monday, if you're a short kid, this is the radio show for you, because I will be the only person in the media to stand up for short children.
Did you read though that if you are pulled over and you do have a child who doesn't have a booster seat and they're not 5'9", you can argue-
4'9".
or 4'9".
Yeah, otherwise I would need a booster seat to get to work.
4'9". You can argue it and then just say, I'm going to go buy a booster seat
Or
and
you-
prove it, and then you get no
You
ticket.
don't carry kids' ID on them, or you just say, yep, they're 13.
The whole thing's ridiculous. Plus, all these parents who have gone through the expense of raising babies and they've gotten rid of the booster seats, and now they're supposed to go out and buy another one for their 13-year-old. It's insanity, absolute insanity.
And just for clarification, is children under 13 have to be in the back seat.
That's insane, too. They're not going to tell me where my kid sits. Forget all this.
Ticket.
Done with all of this. Okay, the other new laws, the minimum age for buying tobacco is up to 21. I actually agree with this one because I think tobacco should be illegal. It kills the user when used correctly, and the only reason tobacco is legal in the first place is because our politicians have always been addicted to the tax revenues, and then they put a sin tax on it, and so it's a massive tax, and they don't want to lose that. They will gladly sacrifice human lives for more money. I mean, that's what politics is about. Any other product that has a normal taxation level that kills tens of thousands of people a year, you think that'd be legal? So, yes, raising the minimum age for buying tobacco, I have no problem with that. Although there should be an exemption for people in our military. If you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you serve in the military, you serve in our country, no way should the state tell you that you can't do that. Because I know that that's still, sadly, still part of, but a shrinking part of military culture. Statewide minimum wage is up to $13.50. This is insane. If you have somebody in central Washington, some kid wants to get a job, and maybe the local diner would let him work for $8 or $9 an hour, and there are some exemptions for 14 to 15 years old, but you couldn't pay him $8 an hour. You have to pay him 85% of the minimum wage. And I worked when the minimum wage was $2.50. My first job, I worked for well below minimum wage, $2 an hour at the local grocery store. But I needed the gig, so I got it. And this is going to tell, again, it's going to hurt businesses. It's going to hurt people who want jobs, who want to get into the job market, especially people, and to have a statewide minimum wage, when you have a cost of living, like Seattle's already above 16 hours, but go right outside of Seattle, Bellevue. Bellevue's cost of living, and compare that to Wapato, and say, yeah, you should have the same minimum wage. It makes absolutely no sense. And then the other one, paid family leave. People now have the right to take 12 to 18 weeks of paid family leave. And it can be for illness of a family member or birth of a child. And again, there's way too much meddling. You can get paid up to $1,000 a week on this. So it's going to tell businesses that they have to pay people $18,000 and get nothing in return. And the argument is, well, you get a more loyal workforce and all of that. We got 3% unemployment. We have the greatest unemployment rate in my lifetime. Businesses have to compete for workers already, but they should decide to what extent they have to fork over money. And this is another example of how when we have that economic downturn, we're going to get wiped out economically. Businesses around here are going to get wiped out with all of the government intrusion. So those are the new laws that are in place here in Washington this year. Up next in the big lead. There was a massive fire. Was this morning? This fire off
Yes.
of I-5? Big fire. They had closed 2 lanes of I-5 northbound next to Boeing's access road because of a brush fire off to the side. And it is presumed that it was a homeless encampment where this started. And I saw a story that Matt Markovich did at Channel 4, and he was talking about how they're saying, no, we got to let them build fires, illegal fires outside. Again, all of this is illegal activity. And the sad reality of this, they say, well, we need fires when it's cold outside. But these are people who have chosen to deny services, to not accept shelter. And they don't want any rules. They have embraced a life, very sadly, but they've embraced a life of using drugs, committing crimes to buy drugs, and living in hell on earth. And we as a society are enabling that for reasons that I will never comprehend. We would never let our children die like these thousands of people are dying. Whether they die this year or in the next 5 or 10 years, they're all dying. And they are living a hellish existence. And none of us as parents would allow that for our children. But government, will they allow that for its people? Oh yeah, in the guise of compassion. And this homelessness industry where people make 6 figures, and we find out that they spend money on trans drag shows instead of actually helping the homeless. It's insane. And that is your big lead for today. Ursula's going to check the news, and then, I see that my favorite media outlet, the Seattle Times, they had a list of Seattle's movers and shakers in the decade to come. I wonder who made it. Let's dive in together. Coming up next.